Hello everyone, this is Darcinovia here, and this is my review on the first four novels of the New Frontier series. Now, for those of you who do not know, what is the New Frontier series? Well, it's a series of Star Trek novels that focuses on characters and a starship called the Excalibur. They're not featured in the show, with the exception of Elizabeth Selby, who makes her appearance in the Next Generation episodes Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2. Everyone else is original that have never appeared in Star Trek lore before outside of this series. And this was the first time that the novel writers of Star Trek were allowed to do more stuff with the Star Trek brand rather than just telling stories that take place in between episodes or in between series. Because in the 1990s, before there was a post series continuity where they told their own story of Star Trek, where they told their own continuations of the characters from Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, Enterprise. They're doing what they're currently doing now with Star Trek, filling in the gaps between episodes and between seasons. New Frontier was something different. It was the first to tell a larger story rather than a story that you could pretty much read, put down, and then read the next novel. Most Star Trek's novels weren't part of a larger universe. This was the first to do that. And there would be other series that would follow that would do the same thing that New Frontier did with this. Now, Paramount did not have faith that this would have been successful, which is why I think they split the novels into 4 parts. Because I think this was originally going to be 2 novels. Or 1. Because it feels like it. Because the way each one of these novels end, it feels like this is part of a larger book. But Peter David, I make it no secret, I think he's a good author. I think he writes really good Star Trek. I think his Star Trek stories are fun. And I think they're really entertaining. And I think he's capable of telling really good stories. Any Star Trek novel that's worth their salt has to be a series of books that are faithful to the ideas of Star Trek and don't stray too far from Star Trek's ideas. Because by this point, Gene Roddenberry had been dead for like a little over half a decade. And DS9, Voyager did do some things that would go against Roddenberry's vision. So I think expanding beyond Roddenberry's vision was a good thing. And you have a crew that is mostly composed of non-human characters, which is something I appreciate in science fiction. Science fiction, I just don't want to read a bunch of human characters when I could be getting that in other works. I like to explore other cultures, whether they're fictional or real. And I like the fact that we are introduced to a bunch of new characters. And they don't overwhelm you when they introduce these characters either. They introduce them one at a time and get us a glimpse of who they are, but don't tell us too much because they'll want the reader to read more. The first of these characters that are introduced is Mackenzie. Mackenzie is a character that I think is interesting. We get a glimpse of who he is in the first chapter, and by the time I read the last chapter of book 4, it made me hungry for more. And I think that's something that a series should do. I view the first 4 novels of New Frontier as a 4-part episode of a Star Trek series. This could have easily been a new Star Trek series if they wanted to do it. But that's not what it is. Now, I like to get more into detail. What do I think of this novel how do I think these series of books, how do I feel like they introduce the reader? Is it worthy of the name Star Trek? Well, I'm going to get into detail in the next section. How does the novels handle introducing characters that do not appear in the shows, or characters that have made their appearance in the show first, like Elizabeth Selby? How does it handle them? Now, to answer the first question, I actually think the novels do a great job introducing characters that are interesting in their own right, not giving too much away about them, because after all, this is a series that's going to go for a while, and you're not going to want to reveal, everything all at once. I mean, if you're planning on doing this into a series that's going to last for many years, you don't want to basically release everything. Now, I actually think it does a good job by slowly introducing these characters, and not in a way where it's overwhelming. It's like, oh, there's that character, there's that character, there's this character, there's that character. I actually think introducing them a few at a time was a good move on Peter David's part in order to get the readers invested into these characters. Mackenzie was a fascinating character. Same thing with the characters that were introduced after him, like Si Kwong and various others. I actually think this novel did a good job introducing characters that are unique. They have their own problems. They actually feel like real people, which is another thing I have to say about these characters. Every single character feels like a real human being. Well, for those of you, though, who look human. And they actually feel like real people. They aren't just cardboard cutouts. They're not just there for the sake of being there. And I think this is something that Peter David thrives at doing. When he introduces a character, he doesn't waste them. He uses them well. Mackenzie is a character that is unique amongst other captains that we've seen up until that point. We've had Benjamin Sisko, Picard, Kirk, Janeway, and I actually think, it was refreshing to have someone different who isn't a stereotypical Starfleet captain, considering he's from a culture that isn't influenced at all by Starfleet. He's from a culture, Mackenzie especially, is from a culture that is alien. He's essentially an alien in Starfleet. Now, an alien in Starfleet, I know that that's going to sound like an oxymoron, but what I mean by an alien, I mean his culture is alien, how his outlook is alien, and how he looks at the Prime Directive is very interesting. And how when one of the people threatened to kill hostages, he's like, oh, you're going to kill the hostages? Go ahead. Like, he doesn't put up with anybody's shit, and I think that's what I like about Mackenzie. He's not he's not your typical, oh, this is like this is the paragon like captain that we expect to see, like Picard or Kirk. No, this is somebody that is no bullshit, that he believes in doing the right thing regardless of the consequences, and regardless if it's convenient for his allies. And I actually think it's refreshing to read about a character that would do that. And I think Elizabeth Selby, the character that we got little of, it's interesting that to know that they once had a relationship, and it's interesting that everything about their dynamic is very realistic. And that's the thing that I really looking forward to reading more about. I actually think they are interesting characters. I think Selby and Mackenzie are an interesting duo when it comes to captain and first officer, and them being former lovers also is another thing that is added more tension, which I think things are going to come to a head in future novels. I think the very fact that Peter David actually was creative when he introduced some aliens, like he did what Star Trek has only recently did on screen was have a character that doesn't adhere to typical gender norms, that they are from a alien species that have both male and female characteristics. So it'd be correct to label them as dual gender, that they're just as much of a man as a woman. Now, I find that interesting as somebody that likes to read about alien cultures, and I think it was very creative to go that direction. He could have easily just made that character, oh, another like female or another male. I give Peter David for doing something more creative, and the character themselves was interesting, and I would like to read more. Not much is really written about them in this point where I'm reading, but I do feel like their dynamic with one of the other characters is something that I'm looking forward to see how it plays out. And of course, you have another character that she went through trauma with. She's a Vulcan, with one of her mating rituals on Vulcan, and her mate died right in front of her as she was in a mind mold, and that fucked her up. And I think that's a dynamic that's interesting. Like, all these characters in this series are damaged in one way or another, and I think that is what I like about this. Every single character in here is realistic, and they don't feel fake. They don't feel like, oh, this is, we're just doing this to like, for shock value. No, this is actually telling a story with real people, and I think New Frontier succeeds in everything that it sets out to do. Setting up a new series. I think the world building was good for this novel. I think the characters were interesting, that it makes me hungry for more, because I think a novel, this doesn't go for Star Trek or Star Wars, novels in general. If you're not interested in the characters or in the world that those characters inhabit, then the author failed at their job. And I think Paramount allowing Peter David to have free reign in telling the story that he wanted to tell with these first novels alone makes me intrigued to read more. Originally, I wasn't interested in reading Star Trek novels that did not feature characters from the show, because I wasn't sure how much I would love reading these books. But I've been reading Star Trek novels since 2016, and I don't show any sign of slowing down. I know a lot of these novels I review of Star Trek are over 20 years old, some of them pushing 30. But I don't care. It's never too late to discover a good story, and New Frontier to me is a good start for a Star Trek series that was never made. So, what do I give the first 4 novels of New Frontier? And how can you get a hold of these? Well, thankfully, with something called Kindle, they're easy to find. Though if you find them on a PDF, I don't hold it against you for reading them that way too. I actually think the New Frontier novels are good, and especially if you're a Star Trek fan that's hungry for more Star Trek, or just isn't interested in the new era Star Trek, you can't go wrong with New Frontier. I will be reviewing these novels as I progress through this series, but the first 4, I decided to review all at once because they're more like novellas, and each novel is just a continuation of the last. And I think all the storylines that started with this novel, they did have a satisfying conclusion, and makes me want to read the next book in the series. So, my rating for the first 4 New Frontier books: classic. Definitely classic. I think these novels are good. I think any Star Trek fan that's interested in reading more about the Star Trek universe, or is looking for something new to read for Star Trek, and they've basically have read everything that they could, or they've watched all the shows and they're hungry for some Star Trek as they're waiting for a new Star Trek season, I'd recommend these books. This is Darth Sinovia. Over and out. May we live long and prosper. And next time I review a Star Trek novel, I'm going to be reviewing, well, I'll let you figure that out. It'll be something that will involve the crew of the Next Generation. Anyway, later.